Hello, I'm Penelope Maver, and welcome back to Earth Converse podcast, where we explore our relationship and conversations with the Earth, all in the hope of inspiring a deeper connection with ourselves, each other, and the Earth that is our home. And guess who I've got here? Yes, Bill Plotkin has arrived. I first mentioned him on, was it episode 1 about the profound impact that Soulcraft and Wild Mind had on my life. And I've quoted him. We've done like a poetry episode that was 24. I talked to Ray about the effects of hallucinogenics and accessing to the soul. Jim Marsden talked about his profound moment where he went to a seminar with David White and Bill Plotkin about soul and poetry. And Jim worked for Animas, and his ex-wife Mary does. I actually want to do a program with Mary in Scotland. And then the little bit of the story is that when I started the Earth Converse podcast, I thought, well, Bill. So I wrote to Bill, and I don't know who wrote back, but it was like, Bill's immersed in this book, and I was like, oh, great, another book from Bill Plotkin. And then there was just sort of, it came out, and then I tweeted it, and then I got a message from his publisher, New World Library, saying, would you like to interview Bill Plotkin? And I thought, is the Pope a Catholic? A resounding yes from me. So, and then I was telling Jenny Daly Gunter, who I interviewed, and she had done, I think, with Animas. And I said, it feels like you're like Cameron Crowe with an interview with the Rolling Stones. It's your rock star. And she goes, yeah, Bill is the rock star of eco-psychology. So I've got my rock star here. So welcome. And
Thank you. Thank you.
So my listeners, in terms of, some people will really know you, and some people will have no idea who you are.
Yep.
So in your words, who is Bill Plotkin?
Okay. I'm a soul initiation guide and have been doing this work in one form or another for 40 years. I was trained as a psychologist and found lots of what for me were inadequacies in Western psychology, and but my work has been guiding people and learning by guiding people, as opposed to reading theories and making up stuff. So through these 40 years of guiding people on this, what I call the journey of soul initiation, which is the title of the new book, we've learned a lot of things, including that contemporary Western models weren't helping us really understand. They only got us so far to understanding what the journey of soul initiation is about, and we had to develop our own models. So I know later in this conversation we'll talk about what I mean by a soul initiation guide. But to answer your question as directly as I can, I'm someone who managed to never lose my love affair with the human world, the Earth community. Even though I grew up in a suburb outside of Boston, Massachusetts, the US, somehow I found my way into the forest and spent much of my youth in the forest. And so I never lost that connection to the wild nature that every human is born to be able to celebrate. But in contemporary societies, we tend to lose that connection. But we can get it back. That's one of the good news pieces. That's part of what we do at Animas Valley Institute, is help people, we call it Ecological Awakening, where it's really a reawakening to our innate membership and participation in this animate world where everything is alive and everything breathes and everything speaks.
How do you mean finding your way to the forest? Like, in terms of how did you in Boston? You know, like was it the yearning or the going into the healing of it, or the exploration, or the mystery, or was it your parents? I see that you dedicated your book to your parents.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in a western suburb of Boston, and the western edge of this western suburb, and outside the door, maybe just quarter mile away, was for a child a very large forest. So I literally went into the forest, and partly because I was fortunate to befriend one other boy who's came from a family who was still somewhat nature oriented, and and that was one of their activities, getting into the wild. My family wasn't that way at all, not even close. So Joseph and I would wander off into the forest and begin to learn about trees um, and animals and creeks and so on.
Sort of that
Um,
childhood curiosity. Yeah.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
a natural child's wonder about the world.
Yeah. And I mean, in terms of that eco awakening, a lot of it, is it like in terms of a remembering of the love that you felt as a child, that reconnection? Is it just,
It is,
yeah.
yeah. A lot of people would say it's a remembering. A lot
Mm,
of people have said that, like on our immersions, our programs, a lot of people have their first experience of eco awakening, and sometimes they will say, um, "I was out there on the land, and all of a sudden there was something like a curtain between me and the world that just shattered, like it was a glass curtain, and it just fell and crumbled. And I experienced myself for the first time as being a full-fledged membership in this larger world. And I didn't know that was even possible. I didn't know I was even missing anything. And yeah, a lot of people would say they remember having experienced that when they were very young. And and then they will often begin to grieve that they lost it, and then celebrate that they got it back.
I was struck by the dream that you remembered as a young boy. What did you say, 5 or 6, about the cemetery in your book? I was struck by that was so vivid for you.
Yes, it's a repeating dream. I had it several
Mm,
times, probably starting age 4 or 5,
mm,
and yeah, it was a dream of being in a very exotic landscape where there's a cemetery. I'll tell you more about it, but
mm,
the I believe that we're all born with uh, various kinds of support to wander into the mysteries of human existence in our personal life and the greater web of life. And I I know that a lot of people have special dreams when they're very young. And it may be that everybody does, and most people forget it, especially forget those dreams, especially in societies that don't honor dreams as sacred in family life and community life. So, and it's like mystery is planting a little seed with these dreams, planting a little seed in our consciousness, and it's kind of like a compass. It's an energetic wave in our being that we're able to um, surf into life, so to speak.
yeah.
So for me, it was this. I grew up in New England, which is very verdant, and um, the dreams were in a land that was very dry and dusty and lots of rocks and red rock, and not a whole lot of trees, no big trees. And I'm walking along up a road, a dirt road, but I'm actually more like floating up this dirt road. And I'm aware that there's something holy to the left over a stone wall, and it becomes clear it's a cemetery. and something exotic about this cemetery. And there's this singing that I can hear in the distance, and I follow that. And I come into the cemetery, and there's these like little buildings. Maybe I would now say that they're like crypts.
Mm.
And I'm following the sound, and after a while I hear like a low male chanting. And I follow that sound, and down a set of stairs, and there's an open door into a small stone building, and there are monks in there, what I would later call monks, but people, men in robes, dark brown robes, and there's a stone table in front of them, and there's a dead person with a light shroud over them. And the monks are chanting, and they're moving various things in their hands, and it's very exotic, of course, to my child mind. But I'm fascinated. And the monks acknowledge my presence but they keep doing what they're doing, as if they were expecting me. And I want to learn. I have this great desire to learn what they know about death. And this is as like a 4 or 5 year old.
But also, you said that about your brother, your older brother, had died before you were born. Was that a connection, that fascination with death, because of that?
I don't know. That's a good question. He died, well before I was born. I don't think that's the connection. No, I don't. I believe that Mystery said, we want to implant into this young person's consciousness a certain kind of relationship to death, because that's going to be so important in who he turns out to be. And who in fact, this goes back to your first question about, tell us about Bill Plotkin. Yeah. As a soul initiation guide, when people first meet me in that role, if I'm in that role for them, then who they're meeting is an agent of death. Because I'm going to support them to die to not only who they think they are, but who they even believe counts as what even counts as an identity, what the world is. And essentially they'd be leaving everything behind in some ways, at least in terms of identity. And it's something that we all long for, is that experience of what I call the soul initiation. We long for it, and it's also something we're absolutely terrified by, understandably. So perhaps when people find me and recognize I'm a soul initiation guide, they're really happy to find someone who might be able to help them in this process. But they're also terrified because they know that I'm not working for them. I'm not working for their ego. My client is their soul. Another way to say it is my client is the earth, is life. And they've come as a sacrifice. And I'm saying, okay, I'm willing to have this relationship with you in which I will support you to die to who you understood yourself to be. And it'll be great ecstasies on the journey, and it'll be very harrowing.
The responsibility of that is so huge, and to take people through that. And I guess what I've noticed in your book, this lovely, you've created a way of articulating it and sort of theorizing it from that applied knowledge of taking people in this journey. So rather than just read about it, you've actually observed human nature, accompanying people them. So you've created this incredible, like you talk about, a detailed map of the descent with, a set of practices. And then these incredible stories of these people that you've guided. And I'm really touched by your honoring of Carl Jung's and Joanna Macy, but also these sort of stories of not well-known people, but are people that have gone absolutely in that. And then I suppose the other part of the book is the more sort of academic, poetic way, And I might start there if I can, because I love this quote, because I think it frames it. I think, and it comes from your beautiful capturing of Mary Oliver's, there's only one question, how to love this world. And you went, what would it look like? What would it look like if we really loved this world and more than human world as fully as we're able, both individually and collectively? And then in that part, you went, a romance with the world is what soul crafts our ego into a visionary artisan of cultural evolution. The journey of soul, and then this journey of soul initiation then is actually a three-way love story between the ego, the soul, and the world. So tell us about love. The three-way love story.
Yeah. Where to start? Love is this universal energy that you might say it's what moves everything. Another way to say that is everything on Earth, with one possible temporary exception, has evolved to be life enhancing. That everything gives away of its gifts and its life to the world, and that's how evolution unfolds. Is that everything is loving the world in the best way it can by offering the unique gifts that it was born with to give to life. So the way our Earth works is it's not life sustaining, it's life enhancing. If it was life sustaining, then after the first single cell bacteria, that would have been it.
Yeah,
It would have sustained conditions for bacteria. But as we know, life keeps getting more complex and more diverse, and it's just beyond understanding magnificent and enchanting. So the one possible exception, at least temporary, is our species. Everybody knows that when we look around now at the world, that not only are we not sustaining life on our planet, we're destroying it. And we're destroying it in geological sense or time frame. We're destroying it incredibly fast. And so that's to say it's troubling. There's no word strong enough to say. We all are living with the anguish of that, of what's happening in the world now. It's our species that has broken the pattern of all other species, that every species supports the life of its ecosystem. Our ecosystem now, of course, is the entire planet. So in order to most deeply love the world, a human being has to go through the journey of soul initiation, which results in true adulthood. And by true adulthood, I mean something that is completely unrelated to the way the contemporary world understands adulthood. It's almost like I'm talking about something different, but I'm going to use the word, and do use the word, adulthood, because I believe that in healthy cultures that we do know of some in the past and present, not many left, the way they embrace adulthood is at least very similar to the way I talk about it. And I'll give you a definition coming up of adulthood. But when we're soul initiated, we have discovered the unique place or niche that we were born to take in the larger Earth community, because everything is born to take a unique place. Every species is, and every individual of every species, even more so, a very unique place. And if and when a human goes through the journey of soul initiation, they not only discover what that unique gift is to give to the world, but we are shapeshifted by it. Our egos, our consciousness, our psyches are shapeshifted by that experience. And that enables us to give our gift to the world. And to do that is loving the world. That's it. We are actually, like we humans are like everything else on this planet, we are designed to love the world. And so part of the love affair as you mentioned, is between the ego and the soul. So, okay, now I should stop and say what I mean by soul. I almost did, but I didn't tell you I was saying it. That, to me, soul is an ecological concept. It's not a psychological one or a
I
spiritual one.
love
And that's why spiritual disciplines and psychology, Western psychology, have had such a hard time with that slippery concept, soul.
Yeah.
But I actually believe the best definition, most useful for soul, is that it's a thing's unique ecological niche.
Mm.
Unique ecological niche that each thing is born to take. And we humans have to go through this soul initiation process to not only discover it, but to be transformed by that discovery. When I tell people that I use the word soul to mean a thing's unique ecological niche, some people react and say, well, fine, Bill, you just changed the topic. I mean, anybody can define anything any way they want. But what does it have to do with the way people actually use the word soul? And my response is, well, it's hard to find in the contemporary Western world any really good definitions of soul at all. But when you listen to the way people use the word, it almost always has something to do with the deepest meaning of something, or the deepest meaning of my life, or the deepest purpose of my life, what gives me the greatest joy and fulfillment, and so on. And so if you think about it, if it really is true that we humans are like everything else on this planet, that we're born with a kind of knowledge, we're born with a kind of knowledge of who we are and what we are to do in this world. What could give us greater purpose or meaning than what we were born for? I mean, that's our unique ecological niche is our deepest meaning and give us our deepest purpose. Okay, so
Yeah.
back to the love affair.
But can I stop you there? Because
Yeah.
one of the questions is that like that we're all born with one. And so we're all born with one, but it takes, in terms of knowing about it and embodying it and shape shifting. So is it like a spectrum? Because I do think of my, second cousin, beautiful Jonty, who died in his sleep at 13, and I like, did he know his niche? Is it sort of like so pure that it doesn't have to be that sort of then go into, the initiated adult or elder? I'm just sort of, or like, I think of friends who really express their love, they've married the love of their life, they've got beautiful children, spend time with them, they love their career, they love their community. Is that, and is that enough, or is it soul evolution a spectrum?
Yeah, it's different than that.
Yeah.
That's one of the hardest things for people to get who are new to our work at Animas Valley Institute is such things as 80 to 90% of contemporary humans in industrialized cultures never reach the stage of life in which the journey of soul initiation happens. Because we're used to in the contemporary world thinking that if there's some realm of spiritual development that you're interested in, or some realm of psychological development you're interested in, if you're over age 13 or 15 or 18 or something, then it's available to you. You just do the practices. And that's one of the difficult lessons that I've had, because it so goes against the grain of Western psychology and spiritualities, that not everybody is eligible for certain spiritual development or psychological development. And the journey of soul initiation, there's at least 80% of people in the contemporary world, it's probably closer to 90%, who haven't had the kind of personal development that would be totally natural in a healthy culture to be able to even start the journey of soul initiation. So one way I say this is that I have a map of nature-based human development. It's 8 stages. And the first 2 are of childhood, and the second 2 are of adolescence, and so on. And the third stage is early adolescence. And it's been my understanding now for a few decades that the vast majority of at least Western people that I get to know are, regardless of what age they are, if they're over age 12, they're in early adolescence, and if you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and so on, and you're still in early adolescence, you're stuck there. And the reason you're stuck is because that your childhood was not the kind that supported you to get into a healthy early adolescence. But there are lots and lots of people who, of various ages, who are in a healthy early adolescence, and which I call that stage the oasis, are perfectly capable of loving the world and other people very deeply. That we're capable of love, deep love, in any stage of life, especially if it's a healthy stage. It's just unfortunately too many children are not in healthy childhood stages, and too many early adolescents aren't either. But yeah, you can love the world and feel fulfilled in your job and your family life and your social circle and so on, but without having started at all the journey of soul initiation.
Yeah. And in terms of that, you needed that initiated adult for that real cultural evolution, in terms of when you're talking about visionaries, revolutionaries, and evolutionaries. In order really to create that change that the world needs.
Yeah, incredibly exciting things going on in the world today. Visionary organizations and individuals who are working, biologists and cosmologists know about the universe, is that the greatest moments of transformation I don't know, it might be a rule, I don't know, but at least, at the very least, those moments, great moments of transformation, come out of the greatest moments of crisis. So we humans have created a crisis for ourselves and for most of the other species on the planet, and for the planet's biosphere as a whole. And whether it will trigger a transformation in time, we don't know. So I use the analogy of an individual initiation process. I'm talking about not a generic initiation process, but the journey of soul initiation, which is it's as ancient as humanity, but it's almost completely lost and forgotten in the contemporary world. There's other kinds of initiation processes, but this is something different than probably anybody really knows about. And if that seems far-fetched, please read my book, and I think you'll end up agreeing with me.
It was interesting how you felt like you really had to explain that, like really in terms of, I know you're in terms of your academic rigor and robustness around that, but it was really interesting. You spent to really wanting to explain that.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it's essential, because I believe the way our human minds work, and there's nothing wrong with this, it's just the way we work, probably other than humans as well, is that when we have learned, especially when we get to adolescence, and we've learned a sense of what the world is, and we kind of have a map of the world, and there's certain categories of things that exist in the world, and there's nothing really new under the sun. And so when you hear about something new from somebody like me speaking about something, our tendency is to say, oh, he's talking about a version of this thing I already know about. But what if it isn't a version of what you know about? You're still going to believe it's a version of what, because that's why someone like me has to say, don't put this in a box you already know about, because it probably won't fit. And you might not even know it doesn't fit. For example, people tend to think that what we do at Animas is rites of passage. Absolutely not rites of passage. Every once in a blue moon, maybe we'll support someone in their passage through a ritual, but very, very rare. What the journey of soul initiation is something that happens between two passages, between the passage that goes from early adolescence to late adolescence, and the passage that goes from late adolescence to adulthood. Those are passages. But the journey or the process of soul initiation isn't a movement from one stage to the next. It's a movement within a stage. And it generally takes several years, like most life stages. So
I do, yeah, I suppose, because I do think of a rite of passage could be like every moment is a rite of passage in a way, in a micro way. And then there's a whole rite of passage. But I suppose in terms of the definition of the original.
Yeah, we can say that. And there's two kinds of passages. One is social or vocational or religious. It's just change in social status. Like a birthday can be a passage, or a marriage ceremony. It's a change in social status, or being a novice in a religious organization and then becoming a priest or priestess, or joining an organization or something like that. And what's true about those kinds of passages or those kinds of initiation processes is that there's some other human who says, now you have this new status, or some group that says, now you have this new status. Whereas the other kind of passage or initiation process is a very different thing. It's the best examples are when we move from one stage of life to another. No other human can say, okay, now you're an adolescent because you've gone through this ritual, or now you're a man when you were a boy, or a woman when you had been a girl. That those kind of passages, only mystery can bring that about. And a rite of passage for those kinds of passages don't make the passage happen. They celebrate the fact that passage has already happened. Mystery brought you through a passage. They celebrate it. They give the person who's gone through that passage a orientation to what they've just lost, what stage of that's over, and what new stage is starting. That's a very, very different world and consciousness for them. And that rite of passage lets their community know, hey, this person just gone through this major passage. And they might be stumbling around a little bit confused for a while, and they could use our support.
No, I like that. So orienteering for the person and the community. Yeah.
Yeah. And so everybody knows about these kind of passages, but we don't talk about them much in the contemporary world. Like the first one is birth. Generally speaking, people don't get born because someone decides you're going to get born. I mean, medically, you can induce labor and so forth, but generally, it's mystery that decides you're going to be born. And then there's another passage that we don't hardly even talk about. The next major life passage we hardly talk about in the contemporary world. And Arnold van Gennep, who wrote the book Rites of Passage, called it naming. But what happens roughly at the end of the third year, when an individual becomes conscious of themselves, or psychologists would say attains autobiographical memory, which is to say the ego comes online. That's a major passage. And nobody, you don't bring a child to a priest or something, or priestess at a certain age and say, could you do this ritual so my child will have an ego that is conscious of itself? No, it's up to mystery. But everybody knows they went through that, and you have a very different consciousness afterwards, namely a consciousness of yourself, which you didn't have before. And then everybody knows about, who's over age 13 or so, knows about puberty.
Well, we don't even celebrate that. I did a podcast with Sophia Stahl, and just sort of actually not even celebrating in Western culture, the menstrual cycle, the period. It's sort of like seen as a curse and like brushed under. And it's like, here's some pads, here's some tampons, and, on you go.
Yeah.
So
exactly. It's not celebrated. It's not even deeply understood what it is. It's a psycho-spiritual shift, and mystery decides when it happens. And biologically, all of us, if we live to age 13 or so, we get through those first three passages: birth, naming, and puberty. We get a free ride biologically. But the next passages depend on either you're living in a healthy culture or you just kind of get lucky. And otherwise, the next passages don't happen. And all healthy cultures have practices to support a person to go through the passages after puberty. In the contemporary world, the only real passage for most people after puberty is death. That's it. And there's 5 passages in there that most people don't go through. The journey of soul initiation is, our work at Animas is creating a one particular version of a contemporary nature-based Western adaptation of something that's pan-cultural, I believe, that particular journey. So it's not a rite of passage, journey of soul initiation, and it's not therapy. It's not for healing. It's not like the newest healing regimen under the sun. And for people that other things didn't work for, it's not healing at all. It's actually counter-therapeutic, which means what I mean by that is that the journey of soul initiation will undermine your adaptation to your social life, your social circle, your job, your relationships, your career. And so to be able to go through the journey of soul initiation, you need to be a pretty mature, well put together early adolescent, or have moved actually into late adolescence. And that takes some work. So someone who's ready for the journey of soul initiation is actually someone who's achieved basic success in their vocational life, in their social life. It's not someone whose life is completely coming apart. It seems doesn't work. Well, you do come apart.
Well, yeah.
It's like you get to go on this journey of dismemberment only after you've got your life together in a really good way as an early adolescent.
So tell us about you use the canyon analogy, which I really, or actually in terms of, I suppose, I don't know where you want to bring in the butterfly or the moth, or in your own experience.
Yeah, we can do both actually.
Yeah, because I think that's so powerful and it brings it alive, doesn't it?
Yeah. So let me just see if I wanted to say more about, just briefly, what this journey isn't, or what.
Okay.
The book is primarily actually about one particular spiritual adventure that's essential to the journey of soul initiation and is part of it. And I call that the descent to soul. Yeah. And the journey of soul initiation is typically several years. For most people, it can be longer. But this is one spiritual adventure that has to happen at least once, a descent to soul. And a descent is anywhere, I guess it could be as quick as a week or two. That would be extremely rare, but it could be many months or a year or more. Some of the things I like to remind people is that, or point out, is that the descent to soul it's not shamanism. It's not a vision fast or a vision quest, although a vision fast can be part of it. And it's not a psychedelic journey, although in some cultures, plant medicines are used as part of a descent, but aren't necessary. Okay, so the descent to soul, that's primarily what the book is about. And when I first started guiding 40 years ago, I was using Arnold van Gennep's model of rites of passage in the 3 phases. What did he call them? Something like severance, initiation, and return, something like that. Or that might have been Joseph Campbell's version, but that's the other map I was using, Campbell's version of a map of the hero's journey. And it was, both of those maps were somewhat helpful, but pretty quickly, I caught on that it wasn't, neither model was particularly right. And so mainly what my colleagues and I have been doing is observing people going through this journey, and in particular descent to soul, and mapping the patterns of what actually happens. So we ended up with a 5-phase map of the journey, not 3 like Van Gennep or Campbell, but 5.
And in fact, Jonathan on a interview did a map. So I thought I'd just preempt.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Jonathan, somebody over there?
Was it Jonathan Ellaby? Your lovely interview with him.
Okay.
Was it?
Great. Yeah. Got it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's two analogies that we use to help people understand what the descent to soul is. And one is it's a journey into Soul Canyon. You just showed us that map. And another one is that it's the analogy of what a caterpillar goes through on its way to becoming a butterfly or a moth. So let's use, maybe I'll do both kind of simultaneously.
Weave
The
it.
first, sorry?
Weave
Wing
it.
Yeah, weave it, yeah. So the first phase is like, it's like you're in the forest or more or less flatland and you're heading towards the Grand Canyon. And you know there's the Grand Canyon out there somewhere, but you're on your way through the forest towards the canyon rim. And that corresponds to, in the human descent to soul, the preparation time. And there's all kinds of ways to prepare oneself. And it's mostly, for us Western people, it's psycho-spiritual preparation. In particular, we are doing what I call cultivating the four facets of innate human wholeness, because we're all born with these four facets. At Animas, we map them onto the four cardinal directions, which is one of nature's universal templates. And my book, Wild Mind, goes into great detail about these four facets of human wholeness. We're all born with the seeds of them, but contemporary society tends to suppress the development of all four of them, especially two of them. The two that have to do with our capacity for feeling and experience kinship with the world, and the facet that has to do with our deep imagination or the muse, or our fascination with the undoing of things and the darkness. And that most contemporary humans need a lot of preparation with that if the descent to soul is going to go well for them. It even can be life-threatening, and both psychologically and physically, the descent, if you're not well prepared. We also need to develop further our capacity to heal ourselves psychologically, because we're going to have to depend on ourselves primarily during a descent. And the practices for doing these things, cultivating wholeness, which in shorthand we call holing, and the capacity to heal ourselves, which is to say to embrace and love the parts of ourselves that we call inner protectors, who are trying to keep us safe. And like the number one thing they want to keep us safe from is the descent to soul. So they'll sabotage it if we don't know how to love them. And that's what self-healing is, not getting rid of any part of ourselves, including our inner critics, but loving them.
I loved how you used in terms of in Wild Mind, the loyal soldiers. I love that analogy of that.
Yeah, the loyal soldiers are one category, one of four. It's actually part of one of four categories of inner protectors. We have lots of them. We have inner addicts and escapists, and we have wounded children and outcasts, and we have the shadow. And we have our inner critics, such as the loyal soldier or the lion tamer and so forth. We have a whole
a whole bunch.
And again, that's in the book Wild Mind. And I'm describing and just giving you a few examples of the kind of preparation that we need to make before we get out of the forest and get to the edge of the Grand Canyon. So it's very, very, very important. Every year we learn more that as guides, we often have to slow people down and say, you're going to really need good access to this resource that you were born with, but you need to cultivate it before we'd recommend you jump over the edge. Okay, so for the caterpillar, the preparation stage or phase is when, if it's a moth caterpillar, it's when they're spinning a cocoon for themselves. They're not in the cocoon yet, they're just spinning it. And for a butterfly caterpillar, their body actually changes into a cocoon-like thing called a chrysalis. That's preparation. Okay, so then you get to the edge of Soul Canyon and you look down and your stomach goes into your throat and you turn around and say, maybe this wasn't such a good idea. And you look into the abyss and there's dark shadows down there, and you've heard stories and myths and you don't really know if you're ready, and you never feel fully ready. And what's happening for a human at that time is a lot of things, but two of them is the crisis and the call. That even though your life has been going quite well, and you've been a really healthy early adolescent for some number of years, there's something in some way that you feel life is pulling the rug out from underneath you. There's some kind of crisis that is going on in your life. It might be a loss of professional standing, as happened to Carl Jung when he had his break with Freud. And Freud didn't kick him out. Jung kicked himself out, and he had to be authentic. And that was a crisis. And then he had an affair, or second affair, with someone while he was, implication, of course, he was married to Emma. He had his affair with Tony Wolff. That was the crisis. And there were a few other crises too. But the second thing that happens when we're standing there at the edge of Soul Canyon, with the Grand Canyon example here, is that you're feeling the call, the longing to go into the depths. You're feeling soul or mystery or something calling you, and it's deeply romantic in a certain sense, or erotic. And you find you have this deep, deep longing to wander into the world in a way you never had before, and to explore the mysteries of this world, which are so much deeper and more diverse than anything we knew of in early adolescence, which was mysterious enough, like learning about sex and relationships.
And life itself
so
is, kind of interesting.
Kind of interesting. The natural world, amazingly interesting.
Yeah.
But we didn't really get this other dimension of mystery until we make the passage from the oasis, that's early adolescence, to the cocoon, that's late adolescence. I call that passage confirmation. So we feel this call, and the call, we wouldn't be able to say yes to the call unless there had been a crisis that destabilizes us. And if we were merely destabilized by a crisis, but we didn't feel the call, we would have patched ourselves up and had a nice tourist view of the Grand Canyon and then moved on to some other national park or something. So when the crisis and the call, they happen together, then you start this fall. You could call it a descent into the canyon. It often feels like free fall. And what's happening for the human then is our whatever identity we had, socially, vocationally, religious faith, everything, just starts to crumble. It's a dismemberment experience. And there's something joyful about it, but it's also extremely troubling and disorienting. It helps if you know what's going on. It helps if you have a guide. But people like Carl Jung, for example, or Joanna Macy, didn't have a guide who knew what was happening to them. And for the caterpillar, what's happening during that phase, that second phase, is that its body dissolves in the chrysalis. It literally, imagine that, literally its body turns into soup. And that's why the name I've chosen for the second phase of a human's descent to soul is dissolution. We dissolve.
Yeah.
But it's not our body that dissolves, it's our identity.
It's such a powerful word. I really, and powerful image, really. Yeah.
Dissolution, yeah. Becoming caterpillar soup. And once the caterpillar is soup, then there are these specialized cells that have been in the caterpillar's body all along. The caterpillar, we're going to imagine, never knew about. And biologists call them imaginal cells. And it's actually a biological term because the adult of that species, either a moth or a butterfly, is known by biologists as the imago.
Yeah.
So the imaginal cells are the cells in the caterpillar that have always been imagining being an imago, which is to say, imagining flight. And these imaginal cells, they've been dormant. And they've been hiding out inside the caterpillar's body because the caterpillar's immune system would destroy them immediately. Because it's like this foreign organism inside the caterpillar. So once the caterpillar is soup, then the imaginal cells wake up and they imagine flight. And that in the human, this is the third phase. This is once we're at the bottom of the canyon. And that phase is, I call soul encounter. And that's when we have an image or an experience, a glimpse of what our unique ecological niche is. And so that's soul encounter. The caterpillar is imagining a butterfly. Each human has their own unique image that poet David Whyte refers to as the truth at the center of the image we were born with. Imagine that we were actually born with this mystical image.
Really?
So the image is essentially a metaphor, because during a soul encounter, we don't actually get like a ecological description of a niche. We get a metaphor that points to that niche. That's how it works for us humans. So for me, those of you who've read my book will know that I'll make this very long story very short. I was 30 years old, and on my first vision fast, I took myself out alone into the Colorado mountains to tree line, 11,500 feet in late summer, and fasted for 4 days and nights. And on the fourth day, I had an interaction with a spruce tree and a butterfly. I'll just say the butterfly flew towards me and actually touched my left side of my face with her wing as she went by. And I heard her say, "Cocoon weaver." And obviously I wasn't expecting that or anything like it. And it took me a while to realize emotionally, to get it, that I'd just been shown what I later came to call, following David Whyte, the truth at the center of the image I was born with, that this was showing me my unique ecological niche, but I had absolutely no idea what it meant. And that's the metaphor that I've been discovering the meaning of now for 40 years and still learning.
Really honoring that.
Yeah. And it's not, a soul encounter is not primarily information. It's not like somebody, hands you a card and say, okay, this is what you're going to do in life, get busy. Some soul encounters don't have information at all. In fact, they're just deep movement of the psyche and the soma, and we're forever changed. And even the soul encounters that come with something that seems like information, the primary thing that happens is like being struck by lightning, and it sets up the process of the ego being reshaped from an adolescent ego to an adult ego. So back to the caterpillar, what's happening in phase 3, I already mentioned, is this imaginal cells waking up. And phase 4, which is Soul Canyon, that's like going back up the canyon wall on the other side of the canyon, I call that metamorphosis. And for the caterpillar, or caterpillar soup, what's happening is the imaginal cells are now fashioning a butterfly or a moth body out of the recyclable materials of a former caterpillar. And if you think about it, that's obviously essential. If you're ever going to have a butterfly or a moth, you got to build the body, you build the structure first.
Yeah.
So notice what that clues us into, that in the human, you don't have your soul encounter. You don't have, in my case, it was a waking experience with a butterfly. For other people, it could be a dream, or it could be something that comes out of a ceremony they enact, or it could just be a deep intuition about the pattern their life makes that they had never seen before on a deep ecological level. There's soul encounters come in lots of forms, and having an encounter with an animal, in my case, a butterfly, is not any more common than other forms of soul encounters. But if I were to leave the cocoon stage at that point, I would be like a caterpillar soup that that just pours out of a
Climbing
ruptured
around.
cocoon,
Yeah.
and you just go splat somewhere,
Yeah.
and you'll never fly.
Yeah. Mm.
So the caterpillar with the imaginal cells has to create this butterfly, and it takes some time. And it takes some time for a human ego, to make this journey from its adolescent identity version to an adult version. It can take years for that to happen. With guidance, I think it can easily take less than a year, but that metamorphosis stage is essential. And before we at Animas Valley Institute understood this, we were unknowingly supporting people we were guiding after they had their soul encounter to go splat. And because we were supporting them to then start figuring out, how are you going to live this image in the world? And that's too soon to ask that question. You have to stay in the metamorphosis stage while your adult ego is being shaped. And so a number of years ago, we started getting very deliberate about creating practices that help people go from soul encounter to an adult ego, which is to say, to go through this phase of metamorphosis. Then back to the caterpillar, or now it's a butterfly in a cocoon or a chrysalis or a moth. At some point, the moth and butterfly is well formed enough, and then the cocoon cracks open, or this adult being, or almost adult being, cracks open out of the cocoon, but it can't fly yet. It has to like hang out on a branch somewhere that the chrysalis cocoon had been attached to, and it has to pump fluid into its wings before those wings can flap. And then it just slowly starts practicing flapping, but it can't fly yet. It takes a little while. And that's the fifth phase of the descent. I call it enactment. And in the Soul Canyon example, it's when we've gotten up to the tableland at the rim of the canyon on the other side. And it takes some while to walk back to the village. And when we're walking back to the village, that's the enactment phase. And what we're doing is anything we can figure out to embody this new ego, to embody this image or this truth at the center of the image we were born with, in just little ways. And as to just get into the habit of being of service to the world from this new identity. And that takes some time. And only after we've done that for a while, then we go through the passage of soul initiation, which is basically when mystery says, okay, you have done well enough in creating the beginnings of an adult ego that not only knows what it was born to do, but actually has a good chance of being able to do it. And now this stage of the cocoon, which has been a mystery school, an enchanting mystery school, which is, you couldn't have hoped for more excitement in life. Then mystery says you're done with mystery school, and now you go out into the world and you serve the world. And what a horrible thing to hear. I mean, because the mystery school was the best.
The fun part. Now you got
It was the fun part.
Yeah.
Now you got to do something with it.
Yeah.
And that's when the adults, first of the two adult stages, begins. And your task in that stage, among other things, early adulthood, is to choose at least one delivery system that would be a good way to embody your unique ecological niche. So for me, it was psychotherapy at first, and later it was guiding vision fasts, and then later it was guiding soulcraft programs. But and when people saw what I was doing, or were being served by what I was doing, or not served by what I was doing, they saw a psychotherapist, or a writer,
Yeah.
or a soulcraft guide. But when I was doing my work well, I understood what I was doing was weaving cocoons. And I was just using the delivery systems of writing or guiding or being a therapist. Okay. So at any rate, there's your tour of
That's a wonderful.
5
You did that
phases.
very well in terms of both. Yeah, weaving both both metaphors, and I really appreciate this metamorphosis in particular. I think because the practices. I mean, even in terms of my experience with either rites of passage, school of life borders, it is that, or or that, how could you just come back, what do you do with all that, and it's that is such a sacred time, isn't it, the metamorphosis and the practices.
Metamorphosis is yes. Well, I guess they're all sacred times, but metamorphosis is what we might miss. And the one reason I missed it is because Joseph Campbell missed it.
Just
He had these 3
return.
phases. Sorry?
Just return.
Yeah, that's what he called it. There's the
Okay.
first is departure. He either called it departure or severance or separation. And then there's the middle phase.
Threshold.
Threshold.
Yeah.
And where you find the boon that is yours to bring back to your people. That's one of Campbell's many examples. And then you return, and there's no metamorphosis phase in there. And so you can see how a map makes all the difference. That if you have a map that doesn't have a metamorphosis stage, you might not recognize the need for it.
Yeah, really.
And you're going to end up having caterpillars go splat.
Yeah. And that's a waste. But I love this nuances. I really appreciate that. And you've always been so generous about the practices. I mean, in terms of soulcraft, you bring that, and you literally weave soulcraft, wild mind practices in the book. And I really, like I say about the Jung example and how you've mapped that. I think that's a lovely gift you've given his story, actually. I think, and a lovely for you. Yeah. It's obviously an
Thanks.
mentor,
Yeah.
and it's just and amazing. Like it is, I love the difference about where he did his work while he was, well, having an affair, having family, doing his practice, and during the evening or whatever, going deep into his subconscious. And the rigor of that, like that's an incredible. Or Joanna Macy, giving birth, and under, I suppose, and all these other ones. And I was really touched by your stories. Like Kevin, you were saying, and it was where he would have, on, in a pathological way or a traditional way, would have seen that he's got a mental illness, but through the work and the soul initiation of the gifts of, of who he all his wholeness. I was really touched by all of your beautiful stories that you've captured.
Thank you.
Anything you want to say in terms of not giving any spoiler alerts, but anything about the stories that have touched you, or just hearing those stories, or you've witnessed those stories, haven't you? And over a long period of time, some of them have, number of years, and you've been that, that beautiful guide.
Yeah.
And
Most of the stories, sorry?
An agent of death.
Yeah. Most of the stories in the book are of people I've had the privilege and pleasure to guide over usually at least a few years each. And I'm really deeply moved by these stories. I mean, the courage these people had to go through a journey that very few contemporary people go through. I mean, very few are guided. I should stop and pause here a moment and say that there's a large number, it's a very tiny minority, but a large number of people in the contemporary world who do go through the journey without having a guidebook and without knowing what's going on. And without having a guide. And because if we have a healthy enough childhood and a healthy enough early adolescence, mystery will pop us into that next stage, which is the cocoon. And we'll, after a while, we'll find ourselves going on a descent, and we may not know what's going on. And we may be so scared that we go see a therapist or psychiatrist and they yank us out of the journey. They help us abort it. That probably happens a lot.
I think that happens a lot. I
Yeah.
really do.
Yep. Because we just don't know what's happening. And in a healthy culture, there's always elders in the village, and there are those certain numbers of adults whose soul work is to, like mine, is to guide the journey of soul initiation. And those initiators, and then any elder is able to recognize a young person who is about to go through this passage of confirmation, that they're about to enter the cocoon. And that only happens for young people who've succeeded at the tasks of early adolescence, which, let me mention what those are. The two developmental tasks of early adolescence is to create a social presence or persona in your peer group that is both authentic, that's task number one, and socially accepted, that's the second task. Both authentic and socially accepted. That not only do you belong to a peer group and you're appreciated and loved, but you're real. You're being the real you. You're not just conforming in order to get acceptance. And in a healthy culture, that's challenging enough, because essentially what you're doing in early adolescence is you're creating a social reality or in a social identity that's different than the one you had in childhood. It's related to the one you had with your family in childhood. That's the foundation of it. But something every early adolescent has to do is to take the value system and all the nurturance they receive from their family, and then take all the pieces of themselves and create their own version of it. And it's, we often use the metaphor of a drama, like you're creating your own drama, and you get to decide which other humans are going to play which parts in your drama. That's something you don't do in childhood, but in early adolescence, you got to do it. And in our contemporary culture, there's such an emphasis on conformity. And there's such a lack of self-compassion that people have trouble knowing what's authentically themselves.
For sure.
That people have trouble experiencing and understanding and assimilating their emotions. They have trouble knowing what their true values are, what their real interests are, what their personal style is, without just mimicking somebody else. And so because of that, most people fail at the authenticity part of the early adolescent developmental tasks and get stuck there. But when we do succeed well enough there, no one perfectly succeeds at authenticity and acceptance, but when we do well enough, mystery kicks us into the next stage. And the stories in the book are people who are, at the time of the stories, at that times of their life, they're in the cocoon, and they're going through this disintegration. And in every case, I believe in every story in that book, these are people who were very successful socially and vocationally. And then they got it. This is not who I am. This is not the real me. And they get it on some level that whoever they really are could never be defined in terms of a vocation, a career, a creative project, or a social role. And the analogy we use is, again, with caterpillars. Most people don't know that caterpillars go through a series of major life changes.
All the moltings,
They're
Yeah.
moltings.
Yeah.
They shed their skin and grow another skin.
Yeah.
And we humans do lots of moltings in
Yeah.
early
Yeah.
adolescence.
Mm. Mm.
And again, early adolescence that can start at age 13 and go until you're 40, 50, 80, 100. So in early adolescence, at some point we realize that the social scene we're in, or the romantic partnership we're in, or the job we're in, or the place we're living, the city or the country or whatever it is, it it doesn't really work for us anymore, and we got to leave that whole scene behind and enter another one. That is not the journey of soul initiation, and that's one of the most common misunderstandings.
Yeah.
We call them moltings.
Yeah. Because I think in terms of those moltings are really painful. So it must be my soul initiation. But they're not.
Absolutely.
They're just a different versions of the same skin. Mm.
It's you're a caterpillar on both sides of a molting.
Yeah.
You're an early adolescent if you're a human on both sides of a molting.
Mm.
You have a different identity, different social role or job, and different social scene, but still early adolescent.
Yeah.
But the stories of the people in this book are people who got into the cocoon um, and started feeling this unraveling. And it wasn't just another molting. It wasn't a molting at all. It was leaving behind the entire caterpillar existence, the early adolescent existence, and going into this cocoon stage of several years, um, in which the person is primarily exploring the mysteries of nature and psyche
Mm.
and being profoundly changed by that
Yeah.
experience.
So your desire for your wish for the book, that actually people are recognizing that, or in terms of I'm going to get my wholeness, I'm going to do the preparation in order to provide that opportunity for mystery just to sort of give me a push or be abducted. So sort of like really both recognizing it and inspiring to stepping into that. Is that your desire for the book?
The first desire is people just get that this is probably something that you don't know about yet. It's been lost in the Western world for thousands of years.
Mm.
There may be some mystery schools that do something similar or their own version of it, but it's not something that's understood certainly in the mainstream, but it's not even understood in spiritual circles. That what I came to understand in my 30s was that there's actually two halves of the spiritual journey, and they go in different directions, and they're complementary, and both are necessary in our development. One spiritual journey goes up towards the divine or towards the oneness. It results in our profoundly moving experience, not intellectual understanding, but the experience that our consciousness is part of this larger consciousness, and that everything is in support of everything else, and that's an upper world experience. And the underworld experience is the descent to soul, was the journey towards our deep uniqueness that's much, much deeper than anything about personality or ego, which is to say our unique ecological niche. That's the big one. The whole book is kind of a sketch of this journey, that there are things sort of like it in the contemporary Western world, but not, it hasn't been, I haven't seen anywhere it's been clearly described. So, but then a second aspect of my hope for the book is that for people who are on the journey, that it's a field guide. That's what's in the subtitle. It would help them go through the journey, because you can guide yourself, like Carl Jung did, and Joanna Macy, others. And a third hope for the book is that people who aren't quite ready for the journey will catch on about the kinds of psychospiritual preparation that is necessary, or at least deeply facilitative of getting ready for the journey.
Yeah, lovely. Yeah,
And
those lovely
people who are Sorry?
Those lovely practices that you offer that are just so, just sort of like dipping your toe into that, or
Yeah. And speaking of the practices, most of the practices in this book, and there are dozens and dozens, and also in my earlier books, most all the practices are things that already exist in the world. And the average reader would recognize most of them probably. So the thing that is most unique about the book is not the practices so much, but the model of the experience and the description, the big picture of what the journey is actually about. And the map is actually more important than the practices.
Yeah,
You
sure.
can have the practices, but if you don't really know what the journey is, or you're not ready for the journey, the practices will not have the same effect.
Nothing as practical as a good theory, a good map, in terms of those handrails along the way,
Yeah,
identifying
exactly.
that. It's a beautiful offering in terms of, just offering to the world. What did it stir in you offering it in this way, that it's never been conceptualized in this way? And what doing the book, and particularly I suppose you found yourself in COVID times doing it, and this cultural collective cocoon, I guess, but what has it stirred in you, or what has it meant for you?
Yeah, great question. Some people suspect that as we go through these soul-centric stages of human development that I've attempted to map out in my book, Nature and the Human Soul, that life just gets more joyous and easier, and we kind of coast. And I know when you think about it, everybody would say, nah, that wouldn't be true. And it isn't true. So the more we go through these stages, I'm not talking about the phases of the descent, but the stages of human life, and like get into true adulthood and then late adulthood, things actually keep getting more challenging. And we get stretched further and further. It's like mystery is saying, let's see how much we can, life enhancement, how much gift we can get out of this human being. So, and I say that as a preface to answer your question, because that has been so true for me, that writing this book just took everything. In some ways, it felt like it took more than I had, that it was like extracted from me. And it was very, very challenging in every way. I mean, I think every real writer says something like, writing is not easy. I've heard it said that any writer who says it's easy is either a bad writer or a liar.
Yeah.
So, and I couldn't write it primarily for my ego. I had to have, if the muse didn't show up, it was a wasted day. And the muse I was blessed. The muse kept showing up and showing me things and explaining things that I don't know where it came from. But I just took her guidance as I was writing this. So one way to summarize this is that in 1980, when I had my first soul encounter, I began to slowly learn what it was to weave cocoons. But each year, as I learned more and more about what it is, and it becomes increasingly challenging. So it stirred me right to my depths to write this book, and I thought many times I wouldn't be able to complete it. And I think it's helped me get to this next level of whatever the next phase of my service to the world.
Yeah, what mystery has in store for you? I did. One thing I noticed about in terms of your muse is I would love her to, and I don't know, your poetry, because you are very poetic, but you use other people's poetry, which is beautiful. But I've never, I'd love to. I'd love to know your poetry.
Yeah, it hasn't been one of my delivery systems. I mean, I've written a few poems, but it hasn't been a practice or discipline. And I try to use the richness of language in my prose.
Yes, you
Um,
do. Yeah.
but no, the really accomplished poets. I'm so deeply stirred by them. And that's why there's so much poetry in my books. Because
Oh, they're just wonderful. And they are, the soul poets, and yeah, your partners too. I was really touched by her beautiful words too.
yes, Janine Marie Haugen,
Yeah,
remarkable poet. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Because the quote is, and it's of the only way to discover what soul is asking of you is to become the poet of your everyday life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Lovely.
Yeah, it's true. In some ways, the way I think about it is we're each born as a poem, and the living of our lives, our soul life, once after we're soul initiated, is the enactment, the performance of that poem. Or some people that I know experience their life as a dance or as a song. There's one beautiful story of an Australian woman in the book who, on one of her vision fasts, wasn't her first soul encounter, it was her second or third, I can't remember. She was out in the Slick Rock Desert in Utah with us, and at dawn on the third or fourth morning, it's still not quite, it was before sunset, she heard, maybe it was at night, I can't remember, she heard a woman singing not too far from her, but couldn't see her. And she came to understand that she, this person whose story is in the book, this vision faster, that the song she was hearing was her. It was she was born to be that song in the world. Yeah.
Gives me
It's
goosebumps.
as if each one of us is born as, again, I'll say a certain poem. And during the cocoon stage, it's like we have to wander off into the world to find the poem that we are, as if it's some strands of beautiful verse that are lying, that are draped over a branch in a tree in a forest somewhere, or is bubbling up from a spring, a wellspring in the ground.
Yeah.
It's out there waiting for us. And if we wander with enough intuition and sensitivity, we'll find ourselves standing with that mystery, and that mystery has our name on it literally, but it's not the name our parents gave us.
No. Wow, Cocoon Weaver, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Penelope, for the conversation.
So we'll put a pause here and see you back for the next Earth Converse podcast. In the meantime, go out and enjoy Earth, one conversation at a time.